love is the whole story. And really hear that. It's not just something to put on a bumper sticker or a greeting card. Love is the whole story. How we're breathing is how we're living. And without love, what's the point? And love is an infinite discovery. There's no end to the discovery of love. And I can think of no better thing for us to invest our moments and our awareness into than the discovery of love.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. All right, welcome back to the Embrace and Expand podcast. So today we welcome to the podcast our very first guest of season 2. I came across this beautiful soul during a week-long Breathwork Summit back in January of 2023. After taking pages of notes from his hour-long workshop, I knew I needed to get him onto the podcast to share with all of you his wondrous teachings. He spent several years living and studying in a Hindu monastery, which introduced him to the core body of Tantric traditions, which continue to flow through each of his teachings. Apprenticeships and leadership development, meditation and philosophy training, spiritual awakening, and Vedic rituals were all part of his development into the thought leader that he is today. His teachings, through a mixture of Dharma talks, meditations, and breathwork practices, guide seekers to explore their deepest selves, leading them to live their lives free from tension and full of trust. Through his hugely popular Wanderlust Festival workshops, Unplug teachings, and online trainings, he has been catalyzing the inner evolution of others for decades, helping them to grow, transform obstacles into opportunities, and find love within. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Scott Schwenk. Scott, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Happy to be here. Really happy to be with you.
So I would like to just kind of start out and offer you to just share with us a little bit about your journey and, really what your teachings are kind of foundationed off of.
Okay. So it started very, very young. At this recording, my license says I'm 51 years old. My blood work says I'm somewhere in my early 30s. So who knows what the truth is. And all my life, I've actually felt without any age. I've not kind of gotten a sense of age outside of things like, that indicate some version of you must be this high to go on this ride. So whether it was, voting or whatever it was. So it started really, really young. And I grew up in a household with a mom who built a career as a corporate trainer and an executive coach. So when I was shifting school districts into middle school, coming from another state, I was living in South Carolina for a year. I grew up mostly, except for that year, in Rochester, New York. So when I moved back up with my mom into a new school district, she handed me a copy of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's one of the first books that I could call self-help or self-development that I really remember reading and having a huge impact. And I think I read it multiple times. Things like smile, use a person's first name often and much. It's music to their ears. Just things about getting along. And she would hand me just about every book, it seemed like, that she was reading and have me read it. So that paired with intense curiosity. They called me Curious George when I was a little boy, my family did. I would explore everything I could. And I also had this very strong sense, I didn't know what it was, but this sense that picked up on whether somebody was telling the truth. I didn't realize that my whole life I've been able to sense into people's thinking, because it's not something that I know that I can do it intentionally. And the more I learned to pay attention to it, and once it was later called out by a mentor and told me what it was, then it started to really expand quickly. So my whole life, apparently, I say what people are thinking. Some people get weirded out by it, some people don't. And those things in combination, those three things, the books my mom gave me in her training and development world, the curiosity and these kind of innate capacities, wherever they came from, put me on quite a journey. The more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. The more I discovered, the more questions I asked, and was blessed, as I look back, to have different sort of mentor types, mostly unofficial in the early years, find me, or me find them. Places where I could ask those questions, that my mom just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with for her own educational or whatever. And I would say college was a big chapter turning for me. There was an East-West bookstore across the street from the South Campus of the University at Buffalo that I would go to nearly every day and just pretty much live there. Voraciously going through every different section, like just how many different perspectives can I discover? What's the truth? And immediately freshman year of college, started meditating at a different spiritual bookstore every Tuesday night for 4 years with this group, where I encountered a whole lot of other stuff. So late in that undergraduate, I got wind of a program in New Mexico. There was a woman I had been reading her books named Chris Griscom. And I found out about her because she was originally Shirley MacLaine's acupuncturist that Shirley wrote about in one of her books. And these very specialized sessions that started with needles would bring Shirley into regressions where she was healing core issues and transforming her entire condition of life, and really going through some sort of an awakening process, and something just resonated. And so I found this woman's material, and then it came to pass that she had a school, a divinity school, and I applied to it. While I was in acting school, I applied to it for graduate work, and I just didn't have the money to go on. There was no sort of scholarship situation. And so I decided to hack my own education. And somewhere along that road, I read Autobiography of a Yogi. And that's when the door reopened me to the East. And I say reopened because it felt like coming home. I avoided that book for years, and I don't know why. And then one day, the winter of my senior year of college, I read it and I started having spontaneous experiences. And 6 months later, I found myself in the ashram, the Siddha Yoga ashram, which is a guru-based tradition from India that's based in Vedanta and a form of Tantra called Kashmir Shaivism. And that was another major game changer, another major shift in my experience of being awareness and not just a story. I don't think I've ever said it that way, being awareness and not just a story. Once I moved out to LA, after I left the ashram after a few years, I was trying to cut my teeth in a career in entertainment. I had this big epiphany when I saw The Matrix for the first time, and the 7 times after that in the theater, that I wanted to make movies that really transformed people's lives, shifted their perspective. And when it came around 2001, I was at an agency called Creative Artists Agency. It's like the #1 agency in the world for A-list actors, directors, writers, musicians, producers. We were responsible, my team, my bosses, was responsible for the singer Aaliyah. And so I would talk to her or her mom just about every single day. In fact, we were, I had to figure out a way. She lost her script. She was supposed to be in Matrix 2 and 3, which was very exciting for me, but she lost her script, and they had intense legal stuff around it, the Wachowskis did, to keep secrecy. So which I couldn't stand doing, I had to figure out a way to lie to get her a script. Shortly after, she died in a plane accident, a small plane accident. I think it was around Bahamas or Bermuda or something like that. And within about 10 days, give or take, 9/11 happened. And as you know, that put the world, let alone this country, in reevaluation mode. A lot of us like, wait, life is really, really actually not that certain. And what's the most important thing? One day I saw my boss that Christmas walking out with a big bag of scripts. And that's what we call in the business the weekend read. You have to read through all these scripts and see what might be a fit for some of his clients and whatnot. And I had a flash 10 years on the future of my life, that if I'd gone on there and become an agent, I would be working probably 100 hours a week because I'm kind of a perfectionist. And I realized that I wouldn't be doing the things that really nourish my life. And I just knew that I was done, that I was going to, instead of trying to do my work through the entertainment industry, do it directly. And I was already moonlighting, doing body work and energy work for quite a while. So I helped us hire a replacement, trained her, and then May of 2002, left and started working for myself full time. And about 8 months later is when I met a fellow by the name of David Elliott, who reintroduced me to breathwork. And that was another major game changer. I had tried breathwork before that. It was a horrible experience in my memory. It was a friend of my mom's who had learned rebirthing. She didn't give me a lot of context. My body went into the cramping we call tetany. I just didn't understand what about this was supposed to feel good and how it helped me at all. Until I met David. I went into the full tetany again. Didn't get a lot of context that might happen, but he was also very clairaudient. And the things he was saying at certain moments were so in concert with what was happening inside of me. And the energy moving through my body was like somebody had plugged me into the wall, like lightning was moving through my body. I sat up from that session knowing that this was a new umbrella that could hold all the things I had already learned and all that I was yet to learn. And so I decided to apprentice myself to him, whether he would have me or not. And he said two things to me when I sat up from that session that have forever stuck. One, he said, I'm looking for leaders, not followers. And two, he said, the breath is a tool of the work, it's not the work. And thankfully, he never said what the work was to me so that I could find out for myself. So that went on for a number of years. I apprenticed closely to him for about 8 or 9 years. And somewhere in the long line of all that, I started learning about what's called integral theory, the work of Ken Wilber. And integral theory is an amalgam, a hybrid, and an entirely new perspective on human development, using a lot of existing maps of psychological development through stages. Most of us in Psych 101 or in psych class in high school learned about psychology development in children, but it doesn't stop when we hit 21. That when conditions are right, we continue to move through stages. And those stages, each next stage is a wider capacity of perspective. So imagine looking at a painting and only seeing, like, let's say it's a 4 foot by 4 foot, or if you're in another country, 4 meter by 4 meter painting, you're only seeing a few centimeters or an inch of that painting. And progressively, as we grow through the stages, more of it gets revealed. It was already there the whole time. And the more of it we see, the more complexity we can understand about how life is, how that relationship is going, how this moment could be different. We have more access. So those are some of the broad strokes. Along the way, I met a woman by the name, at the time, her name was Swami Durgananda, when I was in the Siddha Yoga ashram. And she's been mentoring me for about 28 years. She left the ashram, set aside her monk's robes, and is known in the world as Sally Kempton. She's one of the best meditation teachers in the world. She's been training me, and a friend and a second mother who I speak to multiple times a week, usually for many years. And there's been other things in there. So the work, it comes down to, and I use Ken Wilber's phrasing, what I teach and what I practice is waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. Waking up was usually an Eastern thing. training in states of consciousness that are more and more transcendent. But that's not enough, because we can touch that transcendence, but we're interpreting it from the stage of our adult ego development. You can have awakenings at any stage. You can be an awakened, so to speak, fundamentalist. But the way I will express it as a fundamentalist will be very limiting. There'll be an us and a them, and right and wrong and rules. So growing up becomes really, really important. And it turns out that growing up through these structure stages of ego evolution leads to waking up more deeply in a stable way. Cleaning up is illuminating the unconscious, the place where trauma gets stored, the place where the blind spots are, the shadow, as it were. Illuminating it and metabolizing all that stored energy and freeing it up. And then showing up is putting the widest awareness I have access to in the driver's seat as much of the time as possible. So waking up, really important. Growing up, cleaning up, showing up. And so here we are.
I have literally just been sitting here in full body truth bumps to everything that you have been saying, because it resonates so deeply with my own path. And I find it very unique in how many of us can walk very, very different life paths, but fundamentally come down to the same philosophies and the same teachings, even though the verbiage may look different, how it's packaged may be a little bit different, but at its very core, it is all the same. And one of the things that you said in your interview with the Breathwork Summit that I wrote down, that I actually starred a bunch of times, is how you are breathing is how you are living. And when you said that, it just sparked something inside of me that really made me reframe the structuring in how I look at breathwork, and at how, for the longest time for me, I first encountered breathwork when I traveled down to Peru, and I sat with a shaman who's going to be on the podcast this season. And like you, I didn't have much context for the potentiality of what was going to happen and what I was going to experience. And he did mention tetany, that it would be possible to experience cramping in the hands and feet, but I did not know to the extent in which that could happen. And I had full-blown lobster claws, like several times trying to force my hands to open back up, and I was completely resisting the process. And it became more and more painful. And then I finally had to just surrender to it and said, okay, this isn't getting any better. So how can I shift how I'm perceiving this experience to allow it to unfold? And then as soon as that happened, I was just completely covered in light. And then re-experienced all of these memories from 2, 3, 4 years old that made me aware of how I was showing up in the world based on those particular experiences, and how those were still till this day, 30 some odd years later, affecting me in my relationships, in my work life, in my own personal life, and how I was treating myself and talking to myself, and the stories that I was allowing to play within the background. And so you talking about having that more broad perspective, and I love that metaphor of looking at the picture, of only being able to see a small part of it. It makes me think of, I've seen some posts where it's a small picture and it asks you to guess what that is, and then it blows up the picture and it's like, oh, I never would have guessed that that's what it was just by looking at that microscopic outlook. And I recently read a ancient Indian parable that's called The 6 Blind Men and the Elephant. Have you heard that one?
Yes.
Yeah, and so just in short, 6 blind men encounter an elephant, and one of which starts feeling his trunk and says, oh, this elephant is like a snake. Then another starts feeling the tusk and how its smooth shape and point on the end. He says, oh, this elephant is like a spear. And then another is feeling the elephant's ear and feels how smooth and flat it is, and decides that no, the elephant is like a fan. And another one feels the side of the elephant and the vastness of it and how smooth it is, and decides that no, the elephant is like a wall. While another one is feeling the foot and feels the strength and sturdiness of that foot and decides, no, the elephant is like a tree. And then the sixth man feels the tail and feels the shape of the tail and dictates, no, the elephant is like a rope. And so these six men start fighting with one another of, no, it's like this, no, it's like this. And from their perspective, it is one way and all of the others are wrong. And then a sighted man comes along and yells at them to cease their arguing and asks them what's going on. And all six men tell their perspective of what this elephant is. And he looks at him and says, no, you fools. You are only seeing and feeling a part of the elephant. For all of you are correct, but all of you are also wrong. Now, come over here, and he shows each of them the various different parts that the other person was feeling. And then they all recognize that, yes, they were all correct, but they were also wrong. And once they were able to feel all of the portions of the elephant, they then were able to grasp that the elephant was more than just the minute things that they were trying to compare it to. It was a being in and all of its own, offering them a greater perspective on the world.
That's right. That's it right there. Everything already is. Things are only a mystery when you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, I don't know that there's ever a place where there stops being something beyond what we know to discover. And so I'm very committed to remaining in a mood of discovery and marinating in the power of uncertainty, getting more relaxed and present with uncertainty and the possibility that it holds.
I love that, because it's, how boring would life be if you knew what was around every single corner, what every decision was going to be?
That, everybody's hearing that from a different perspective stage, which is very interesting. The stage that's like afraid of out there, predictability sounds like a gift, So everything that could come out of my mouth, I realize, is relative to who's hearing it and the capacity to experience it. And I think I know that's an important pointer to the journey of waking up and growing up, is that we can have the best books, the best teachers out there, but we're still going to have to internalize and go through the experiencing directly, no matter what.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just another concept.
Right. I previously recorded an episode called The Key to Wisdom. And that fundamentally is what that key is by taking the knowledge that you have acquired through life and then applying it based on your own perspective and your own life's upbringing to then transmute that knowledge into learned wisdom. And then through
that's
that
a
wisdom,
stage. That's a stage, but and it's a very important series of stages where there's a you with a history that's applying learned information. And that's where self-help is actually really helpful, through those stages where there's still the investment in a particular sense of a me. And there's a lot more after that. It's not that it means it's better what's after that, because whatever we don't finish out in a stage, if we don't get enough breadth and depth in our evolution, our growing up through a stage, those things become shadow issues for later stages. There's a place where self-help starts to drop off because one recognizes and starts to see through the little me. You go, wait a minute, the me actually becomes like, imagine holding a a baseball in your hand and looking at the baseball.
Mm.
Where I once was the baseball, now I'm looking at the baseball. Where I once thought I was just Scott with a personal history and preferences and aversions, there's a turning about that begins to happen where I start to actually glimpse, and it's just glimpses at first, that Scott is actually an object in my awareness. So then what am I? If I'm looking at this idea of a me, idea of a self, and I can see around it, what am I that's looking at it? And that's a very important next chapter. And so what goes on from there on is a different nuanced set of tools than self-help. Self-help is really, really important. And there's so much self-help out there helping us to develop a healthier me. Then there becomes a right moment, and often it does happen out of order, unfortunately, and then there's a lot of cleanup to do, but to see that me, to see beyond the me. Now the me's still there. Somebody may think they're not. Oh, I had this awakening and I'm talking to you about it over my chai spice latte. Well, who's claiming something? The me. The me is really rugged. It reinvents itself over and over and over again, tries to co-opt any realizations or awakenings we've had to apply it to have a better life. And then things keep going. If there's the right nutrients and the right reflections and people who are maybe a bit further down the road. And then there's a major turning about, another major turning about, where the thing that was looking at the me, which I'll just call awareness, it doesn't belong to any one person, foregrounds and begins to swallow up the me. And when I say swallow up, don't get scared, because that's not a problem. Your identity begins to anchor and integrate as awareness itself. And there's still much more discovery even after that. I can't speak about that other than what I've read and believe to be resonant. There's a lot more.
Yeah.
So the stages, what types of meditation practices or what types of breathing or what types of somatic therapies or whatnot matter. If we don't have a good sense of the actual growing up stage somebody's at, we may misprescribe practices that are either too early for them or too late.
All of that makes me think to that interview that you did in the Breathwork Summit, and where I first found you was complete anything that isn't complete, so you don't carry the past into the present.
Yeah.
And for me, that really solidified why I do some of the types of breath work that I do. And last night I led a inner child connection breathwork session where I guide people through a meditation before the breath work to connect with their inner child. So then they both can experience the breathwork session together. I can at least speak from my own experience, and many of the clients that I've worked with, is that even though they are X number of whatever their age is and they are adults, they are still very much operating from that wounded child aspect. And just like I touched on about my first breathwork experience in Peru of remembering 2, 3, and 4 years old, and how I was still operating from that 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and 4-year-old in how I was showing up in the world. And so this breathwork session is much more gentle than I typically would guide people through in trying to release energy from the body or release pent-up emotions and stresses and traumas and things like that, because now that we're working with the child, we need to adopt more of a feminine style of aspect and be much more gentle and much more nurturing and much more caring to what needs to come up into the awareness to help people to recognize that that inner child hasn't disappeared. They've just been covered over by so much of the things that we have experienced throughout our life that makes us feel like we need to be a certain person, or we need to act a certain way, or fit into a certain box in order to quote unquote be accepted. But by being able to reconnect with that inner child and recognize that the only acceptance we need to have is just the acceptance of ourselves, and love that inner child and cultivate that relationship with that, viewing the world through the eyes of awe and wonder, and really harnessing that inner play and inner joy that we can find in droplets of rain or a beautiful flower or a ray of sunshine. Just all of those things that kids find absolutely fascinating, but as adults, we really just take it for granted for the beauty in which it can bring into our lives.
If we even take it in.
Yes.
And that a lot of what we're talking around is the language trap. You know, just because, well, when we start to get names for things, do we continue to see the thing that we're naming, or just our concept is attached to that word? Like tree. Do I really see the tree, or do I see all my concepts about tree, my learned concepts? You know, when I sit in front of Adam, how many assumptions do I make about Adam? Do I racialize you as white because your skin is lighter than somebody else? And what does that all make up, given that race is actually made up? Do I genderize you as male because you have a beard? And do I add all sorts of concepts around how you might walk, talk, what you might want or not want because of genderizing you as male? And that may not be entirely your internal experience, all those lists of items. You know, what else? Like, well, what if I could just be with you as awareness and discover you without limiting you to what I'm discovering now, and realize that the discovery is as much related to me as it is to you, and it may look completely different next week. And you may express differently next week. And then can I meet my practices this way? Because if I can meet my morning practices or my afternoon or whenever you practice in this way, I'm not trying to either A, check off a list, like a task list of practices, like I did my practices, I washed my hands, I cleaned all my orifices, I ironed my clothes, and I did my meditation. Yes, but did it transform you? Did it affect you? What attitude, what way of sitting, what way of breathing can I show up for the practice where I know I'm in a beautiful psychoactive process, even if it's uncomfortable? And this inner child is really, it's interesting that you bring this up. I've been contemplating a lot the analogy of Russian dolls, those many dolls of different sizes embedded within which. That's my understanding and my experience of how it is. You know, as we wake up to a more expanded perspective, we don't lose the previous perspectives. They are still here, they're included. They may not just be what's in the driver's seat. And one of the most valuable things I've heard in recent years about becoming reactive, you know, in a moment, the right moment, any one of us could probably become reactive. If somebody held a gun to the head of our beloved, or, you know, we're starving for days on end. The term that I've picked up is called shadow crashing. So we get triggered, and some old material that didn't get metabolized from a previous stage is agitated. We will crash. We could be at a very advanced stage of awareness, but we will crash through the tiers and stages until we hit a tier that we're resourced in. Now, if we've done a lot of inner work around completing those pasts, then we may not crash very far. But we could crash all the way down to first person perspective, all the way down to sucking our own thumb in the fetal position. And I'm not being jokey about that. Like, that can actually happen. There's nothing bad about that or wrong as such, but that can happen. And it's very important how we talk to ourselves when we do crash. That crashing is not a forever thing. And actually, with the right understanding, it's good news. It's illuminating a place for freedom. And the key is to develop And while we're developing, have an actual other person or people who can actively embody and sit in the position of the loving, compassionate witness and hold that space. Because if they can't, and we're touching a regressed place of childhood, that can traumatize us. To not have that anchor that we didn't have when we experienced it the first time, when it was really going on as an event. But we can learn, we can train ourselves bit by bit to be able to hold space for our own shadow healing. And it's really, really critically important that we not make up that that's better than having somebody else hold space for us. That we don't push away the timeliness of having a professional facilitator that can actually hold that strong container so that we can fully go into and heal the thing.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great point. I think many of us that are on this self-development, self-help healing journey feel that we need to do it all on our own. We need to develop these practices and then be strong for ourselves. But I have found more healing in the presence of an empathetic witness, in the presence of another person that can hold space for me and allow me to go deep into myself, fully knowing that if I get to a sticking point and I need help, that help is then there.
Yeah.
Versus many times doing my own journeying work, getting to a certain point where I start to get scared or start to feel like I can't go any deeper because I am not prepared to be witness to what it is that's on the other side of this. And then it stops. And then so does my journey. And I stop progressing at that point, and I find this plateau in which I cannot get over. And it wasn't until I recognized that I need help, I need others, I need community to help me get past that point to where it is then I can now start to not only continue my own healing journey, but to also be witness for others' healing journeys and then allow them to be the reflection of where I still have work to do.
Yep. Yeah. Gorgeous. Fantastic. And it's a spiral journey in my experience. You know, I've revisited certain issues so many different times, but from different perspectives and different vantage points. At first, when it was happening, I would think, oh, I failed. I didn't really heal that thing, until I realized each time was moving in for a deeper layer of it. And that as I worked with these deeper layers within myself, I was able to not only empathize with others, but then begin to develop compassion and to recognize the distinct and important difference between empathy and compassion, so that I didn't merge with people's stuff and then maybe go into rescuing them or fixing them or avoiding them. That distinct difference between empathy and compassion was a game changer for me, that they could even be different, that empathy is a function of having an animal body that's got mirror neurons that can feel anything you're feeling or thinking, and that tells me why to care. But if I stop there and I'm just empathizing, I can over-empathize and end up in empathic distress, and I'm no good to anybody. Whereas compassion is love without a story. Compassion doesn't belong to any one person, just like love. They're universal flows of energy. And when I can develop compassion, I can see the wisdom of allowing you to be in the discovery that's important. How many of us have had most of our biggest growths and developments from metabolizing something that was really painful or really confusing? And if somebody'd stepped in and just kind of like bopped us with a magic wand, if they could, and dissolve the energy, we'd have to go recreate some similar thing to be able to move to the next stage. And this is well researched, by the way. The movement in the growing up stages, it happens every time reliably because we encounter a confusion, a challenge that we cannot make meaning of from our current perspective. And as we expand perspective, that moves us into the next stage. And then the maturation of that stage is when we stabilize it. The insight moves from something we glimpse, from time to time as a special state, into how we view all of our moments.
I love that. I think this is a perfect segue in which to ask the question that I ask to all of my guests. And the question is, Scott, what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person you are today?
We don't have enough time for all the items on that list. So let me just see what a particular one is. Actually, I'll just see if you have an insight to direct it more specifically, because it is quite a list.
What would you find was that one catalyzing challenge that you faced in your life that really set the trajectory in which you have dove down these practices and had to maybe revisit multiple times from different perspectives in order to have those realizations that have allowed you to continue on your journey?
I would say one of the most continuous through lines that's been like that, that's been catalytic, is the relationship with my biological father, who, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, cleaned out the bank accounts and left with no intention of returning, and didn't tell anybody, let alone my mom. And we were in a brand new house that there's no way she could have afforded on her own. And she was working full time. He came back after about 10 days. After that they divorced, lived with him for about 3 years. He was really carried a tremendous amount of anger, and later I realized self-hatred, and engaged in habits and brought me around situations that weren't really at all healthy for a child. Lived with him for a year in South Carolina, moved back with my mom, and that was pretty much the end of my relationship with him in any sort of meaningful way. So he became a born-again Christian. He started a whole new life with a new family and was very remote and wouldn't be held to showing up. And so I spent so many years crying, upset, sad, confused, afraid, struggling, trying to find some way to be good enough for his attention. And there were so many iterations of this over decades. Cut to 3 years ago, a little over 3.5 years, I guess, yeah, October 2019, my mom died of cancer after a long journey. And 6 months later, my dad ghosted me. I haven't heard from him since. So I was going to start the answer to your question by talking about this moment 3 years ago. And then I realized the more you spoke about it, that's the continuing thing that's helped me to grow. That's been one of the biggest grains of sand in my oyster, making a pearl, and giving me more compassion for other people as I've metabolized it and seen the ways that pain was showing up unconsciously in my relationships, particularly, chasing unavailable people and going through that pain over and over and over again, and finally getting to a point where I'm going, enough. There's another way, and I'm not going to do it like this anymore. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to metabolize this. I feel like I'm at a place right now where I'm much closer to neutrality about that relationship than I ever imagined possible. And there's still moments when, excuse my French, but thoughts will come up, memories about him, and we're like, fuck that guy. And making that okay. Like, it's not like I'm wishing harm or directing, psychic missiles at him. I wouldn't dare. Because I also understand, and this is the development, when he was about 8 years old, his father died of a heart attack. That father who died of a heart attack was orphaned when he was a child after his mother died, and his dad couldn't take care of all the kids. And I don't know what was the generation before that, so I can't really entirely blame my dad. He's a product of his upbringing and his experience and his unmetabolized wounding. And I feel love in my chest, like I feel a surge just thinking about it. I have compassion for this person. At the same time, I have zero interest in spending time with him. I've turned myself inside out to speak inside of a Christian vernacular that he can understand and try and share my life with him. I should just say the big rub for him he says is that I'm a gay man, and that just really upends his whole world. Who knows what he's got going on the inside, and may or may not be suppressing himself. But all that said, like, I feel this tremendous compassion, and I also have a boundary. I set a boundary, and that's really what I think he ghosted about. I set a boundary about how I wasn't going to be spoken to in certain ways. And I wanted a relationship of equals, respectful, loving, compassionate equals. And he just didn't seem to have that capacity. It was really actually starting me in my journey of recognizing the energy of one-way relationships that were all over my life at that time, and being willing to love somebody and set a boundary, close the door for now on that relationship, with the understanding that they could circle back in a good way. They can go through transformation, and I'm open to that. But for now, not welcome. Not welcome. I love you. I have compassion for your situation. And I also have compassion for my nervous system and my the time I have ahead of me to enjoy life. And there's 8+ billion people. I don't need to attach to any one particular person.
Quite the story. And quite the ability to get to that perspective of neutrality, of recognizing that just because somebody was in your life at one point in time, or just because maybe you want them to be in your life, doesn't necessarily mean that is best for you that they are in your life. And I've had boundaries come up a lot in my own personal journey, as well as many of those of my clients, where they have started to have that same realization that now is the time to set a boundary and say enough is enough. And then all of a sudden, once those boundaries are set, it's like people don't know what to do. People don't know how to address this new person that's showing up, that's finally saying no when they should have really said no all along. But in that wanting to try and please everybody, and I do feel a lot of us that are on this path have probably fallen into the box of people pleaser and wanting to just make others happy to the detriment of our own happiness. But once we finally get to that point of saying enough is enough and that boundary is set, then all of a sudden now we are met with also a different person that is now showing up, because they can no longer get from us what it is that they have been getting this whole time.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And also, even, as you said, they may not be a fit to be in our lives and might not be healthy for us. It may not be yet healthy for them. Also, for us to be in their life, whether they know it or not, to be proximate to somebody whose nervous system is calibrated to a very wide perspective. There's an energy flow around that, and that can be too confronting. Just being proximate to somebody without even having a conversation or knowing their name can be too confronting. And so compassion can sense into that and create some space.
And of course, that's definitely something that can be felt just through energetic co-regulation, whether people understand what's actually happening or not. It brings up this uncomfortable feeling of, well, why is this person able to hold space for me when I can't hold space for them? And then feelings of guilt or shame or remorse or anything like that start to bubble up to the surface that then...
And usually express as anger.
Exactly.
If they don't know better.
Exactly. And then amplifies that whole feeling. And just like you touched on, brings up that anger of, most of the time I think is a projection of anger towards self, more so than anger towards that other person, but then projects onto that other person of, how dare you make me feel this way? When I think that's, I had my high school sweetheart used to always tell me that her mother told her is that nobody can make you feel a certain way. Only you can make yourself feel that way based on your reaction of what it is that they are saying. And for a long time, I resisted that because I didn't want to admit that I had responsibility in how I feel in every moment. because it was easier
Yeah.
to blame other people. It was easier to
Well,
say, well,
also at that age, you may not have yet, I wasn't at that age yet capable of integrating that teaching. That's a very advanced perspective, because if I had taken it in fully at that age, and I had been told that same thing too, then what I would have made up at that age, what I did make up, is then other people get to do whatever they want to me. And I'm just supposed to make myself happy about it. Like, I didn't yet understand boundaries. And I grew up not knowing how to regulate my own nervous system because my parents didn't know how to regulate their own, so they didn't know how to co-regulate with me.
yeah.
That was, if you want to simplify my journey, it was like learning how to regulate my nervous system was the lion's share of the self-help.
And I think that is actually a perfect segue to ask you, what is an easy practice that you have found to help you regulate your nervous system on a day-to-day?
Yeah, thank you. I love sharing this. So, and it's in a particular order. Soften the body first. And I teach that with what I call the 6 points of softening for years. Some people prefer to scan up and down the body, starting at the feet or starting at the head and looking for tension. That doesn't work for me. What works for me is these 6 points of softening that came to me years ago in meditation. So they work well in pairs, the 6 of them, 3 pairs. The first pair is the soles of the feet and the palms of the hands. So if you're not driving right now and you can do this safely, just imagine opening the soles of your feet and the palms of your hands with your imagination, like you're opening fists with your mind, and make it up that it's easy. If you can make it up that it's hard, you can make it up that it's easy. You're softening the skin, the tendons and connective tissue, and the muscles all the way to the bone. You kind of get a sense of that. And then when you feel ready, you can include the next pair, which is the 4 corners of the eyes. Have that sense of the inside, outside corners of the eyes melting like butter on a hot day, as well as the region inside and around your ears. You kind of get a sense of that as you drop into that. And then the final pair, when you're ready, relax and melt the tongue as it sits deeply in the floor of your mouth, along with all the little muscles of the pelvic floor, groin region, sphincter, PC muscle, letting go, letting go, letting go. The breath comes in a little deeper, goes out a little longer. You find your awareness might be expanding a bit wider than your physical body, and just playfully here, soften all 6 points at the same time, infinitely softer, soles, palms, corners of the eyes, region of the ears, tongue, and pelvic floor, groin region. The more these points soften, you begin to feel the points of contact of the breath with the interior of the respiratory system. There's the tip of the nose, back of the throat, the movement of the rib cage. Feeling these rather than describing them in words to yourself. Let the exhalations become longer with each cycle of breath. Just let the exhales become a little longer, a little longer, and a little longer. The longer the exhales, the more the mind stream slows down, and also the heart rate variability stabilizes. And then if and when I find myself in a more relaxed, wider perspective, that's where I might ask myself a fresh question about the situation at hand. Like, how does the source of consciousness within me see this moment, this person, myself, this project? Or how might somebody who's steeped in self-love see this moment? Or how might somebody who is already connected to and knows they are already connected to infinite abundance in all of its forms see this moment, this situation, this relationship? It can be helpful to place a hand over the heart center in the center of the chest, or over the navel, the belly button, and ask the questions into the region you choose, and just be receptive and continue softening and continue lengthening the exhales. And you can ask questions internally, and the answers may come as a picture, as a knowing, as something you hear, smell. If the answer isn't clear, you can ask the next question. You just keep softening and breathing. And when you feel complete with that, you might want to write down or draw or diagram anything arose, without trying to overly shape the drawing or writing. And it opens up a possibility of connecting to greater knowing right where we are. And so that every challenge becomes a doorway to growing up more deeply and waking up more fully.
I've been following along, hopefully with all of you, as Scott described that practice. And the moment when you brought up the question of asking ourselves, I could feel my awareness, consciousness, soul, whatever name you want to put on it, almost just pull itself out of my body and become the observer of what is physically happening in the present moment without actually being attached to it. Without actually being attached to what is happening. And even when you said to place a hand on the heart and the navel, like, I could feel it happening. I could see it happening. I was aware that it was happening, but was not attached to a specific outcome or a specific thing needing to come about from that happening, but just allowing that softness to continue and continue and continue. That's beautiful. That's beautiful practice. Thank you for sharing that, Scott.
Thank you for receiving it.
And thank you so much for taking the time today to be here with me and be here with the listeners. So much wisdom that you had to say in really such a short period of time. And I think part of that wisdom comes from just a different perspective. In being able to offer a different ability in presenting a lot of the same information that I talked about through season 1 of the Embrace and Expand podcast. And if you haven't listened to season 1, I suggest that after this episode, you go back through and listen to those, and you will begin to connect the dots that it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter what we look like. It doesn't matter what our past was like. We can all fundamentally come to the same place. Loving the self means to love another. And if we can love the self truly, then we can love everybody that we encounter. And that is where we can start to live in a much better world.
Amen. May it be so.
Well, Scott, do you have any final pieces of wisdom that you can leave the listeners before we call it an episode?
Love is the whole story. And really hear that. It's not just something to put on a bumper sticker or a greeting card. Love is the whole story. How we're breathing is how we're living. And without love, what's the point? And love is an infinite discovery. There's no end to the discovery of love. And I can think of no better thing for us to invest our moments and our awareness into than the discovery of love.
Aho. Thank you.
Aho.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I speak for myself and all of the listeners. I greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you. I love being here. Happy to be here. Happy to come back if you ever want to talk about more.
We'll definitely have to take you up on that for sure. Well, and I hope you all enjoyed this beautiful conversation with Scott Schwenk. I will put all of his contact information in the show notes below. So if you would like to dive deeper with him into his teachings, into his practices, you will be able to get in touch with him through Instagram, through his website. Scott, is there any projects that you have going on right now or any programs that you would like to touch on?
Yeah. So I've got a number of courses on the site, and one of them is called the Power of Presence Training. It's a 25-hour training that gets 25 hours of CEUs, continuing education credits, through the Yoga Alliance. And it's all the levers and dials so far in my life that I've seen behind facilitating powerful inner work with others without teaching a particular technique. And it's self-paced. Every other 30 minutes is a guided practice of meditation or some form of breath practice. And it moves through 5 pillars: integrity, inner state, preparation, and so on. What is it to deliver teachings that actually land rather than just speak words? What is transmission actually about? Where are my blind spots, and how does illuminating them and working with them help me to facilitate deeper inner work for other people? And this training is of value to anybody who's with humans. You don't have to want to be a teacher or a facilitator. You could be a CEO, you could be a manager, you could be staying at home with your children. You're with humans. What we want to learn to do is let the power of capital P presence be what organizes our choices rather than the unmet needs of the past. So it's a deep dive experience of rewiring ourselves. And like everything I create, it goes deeper every time you repeat it.
I love that. Well, I hope you all investigate that further. I know I will be myself. And again, Scott, thank you so much for your time and so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And thank you all listeners for coming back for another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. I appreciate you all so much, and I'm very grateful that you are here and grateful for your time. Catch you on the next one.